Hi, everybody. Welcome to this month's installment of the CTSI AI workshop series. I have the pleasure to talk to you about AI and sustainability. So welcome to the 8 people who are in the room and the over 50 people who are online. My name is Dr. Titus Schleyer. I'm a research scientist in the Center for Biomedical Informatics at the Regenstrief Institute and a professor of biomedical informatics at Indiana University School of Medicine. So those of you who know me, you know that I don't mince words usually. So I titled my talk somewhat provocatively, "Will AI save us or kill us?" And when I was looking for a visual analogy to AI, I put up a picture of Rocky Mountain National Park from a couple of years ago. And as you can see, there's a burnt tree stump in the foreground. In fact, this was during a wildfire in Rocky Mountain National Park. We didn't hike in the fire itself, but we were not far away from it. So my question to you is, and I would also invite the people online to tell me, why is a wildfire somewhat of an apt analogy to AI? So I'll give you about 15 seconds to think about that. And I have a microphone at the ready, so if you're in the room, you can just signal me. I will rush to your side. And on the chat, Zach will tell us what people wrote in the Zach. Yes, go ahead.
Because a wildfire might destroy rapidly and evolves rapidly. So similar to AI is evolving rapidly, and you don't know what the future effects might be, beneficial or harmful.
Okay, very good thought. So we have kind of the negative side, it evolves rapidly, but it can also destroy things rapidly, and we're going to talk about that. Anything on the plus side of wildfires? Like, why might I say that wildfires are actually good?
They clear a lot of undergrowth, like that needs to be cleared so that new plants can grow.
Excellent. So that's the other side of it. So wildfires actually have been a feature of nature for millions of years. And in many ecosystems, wildfires co-evolved with plants. So out west, for instance, the big redwood trees, their seeds need wildfires to germinate. They actually don't germinate if they haven't been through a period of high heat, which is typically provided by wildfires. So you got the analogy. Thank you for that. It's always wonderful to talk to very educated audiences, and this is no exception. So let's dive right in. And as you know by now, also from previous speeches from me, I'm all in for interactivity. So if you have a question, you raise your hand here. Online, as I said, Zach is monitoring the chat, and you can even unmute yourself online. It makes the talk more valuable for you and more interesting for me to give. So here's a little outline about the talk. We'll first talk about the environmental challenges of AI. So what are some of the negatives? We'll talk about 2 case studies. One of them is about AI-powered messaging. And as you know, we are adopting AI in healthcare at a very rapid clip. And AI-powered messaging is actually one of those things that people really like. I'll also profile another case study about using AI for diabetic retinopathy screening exams, which interestingly shows how AI can actually help us be more efficient. So that's the good side of AI. And then we'll broaden the discussion a little bit. What do we see for AI in healthcare in terms of sustainability? And all of this, of course, is embedded, hopefully, in an open discussion. So let's talk about, the fundamentals of AI in healthcare. One of the papers I read in preparation for this talk shows that AI in healthcare is being adopted roughly 2.5 times faster than in the broader economy. So healthcare is like a big quote unquote adopter and investor of AI. And when you look at the range of applications that we support with AI in healthcare, you see quite a big list, and this is not a very complete list. So for instance, ambient scribes is one thing. I don't know whether Sean is on the call, but Sean always talks about his wife, Cherie, how she saves so much time by having, I think it's the Nuance product, DAX, listen into patient conversations and transcribe this. So imagine, ambient scribes, you and the patient are together, and AI listens in. At the very end, it gives you a summary of your visit. And then you as a clinician, hopefully you don't have to make too many modifications, but it's basically having somebody like an assistant who is writing as you talk with the patient. I can completely see the attractiveness from the clinician's part. We have chart and visit summarization. So imagine as a clinician, you have to look through a lengthy chart. And we've done studies here, did one in cardiology a couple of years ago. It's a really labor intensive to jump back and forth from different notes, find the right information you're looking for. With AI, you can say, when was the patient's first heart attack? And it'll actually do a pretty good job at retrieving that information for you. Inbox and patient message drafting, we'll come to that example in a little minute. And we also have large language model assistant, predictive algorithms, risk prediction, AI to, for instance, predict, is this patient at risk of sepsis, yes or no? And that, of course, has great benefits for your clinical management. And in imaging AI, of course, many algorithms are better at detecting beginning malignancies on radiographs or CT scans than human pathologists are. So lots of real clinical benefits. Given all that, and that was still early in the adoption of AI, the next 5 to 10 years are really a critical window in which we define how do we use AI? How do we use AI for good? And how do we do it in a way that doesn't create too much damage? So let's talk about a little bit the negative consequences of AI. AI is extremely resource intensive. It requires a lot of electricity. It requires a lot of water. Here's some figures. In terms of electricity in 2023, AI in the United States used 176 terawatts of electricity. To put that in context, that is about 4% of the 4,000 terawatt hours that the United States uses in any given year. Data center electricity is sourced to a large degree from natural gas, which is better than coal, but has a larger carbon footprint than alternative energies. So Indiana, for instance, is, as I learned, a fairly cheap natural gas state. So if you use natural gas in your house, you're actually better off because it insulates you a little bit more from electricity prices, but from rising electricity prices. But burning gas is a polluting activity. And speaking of electricity prices, I don't know how closely everyone in the room watches their electricity bill. We have seen quite a few increases, not as bad as in some areas and states where there's a lot of data centers. So Virginia, the state of Virginia, is the capital of data centers in the United States. They have seen electricity prices that will make your eyes, electricity price hikes that will make your eyes pop. So unfortunately, utilities, when they invest in the generative capability to support data centers, we all pay for it. Anybody know about what's happening with data centers in Indiana? What is our take on it? And also, do you remember an instance where we tried to build a data center and we actually successfully canceled that project? Okay, so the Martindale-Brightwood neighborhood in the south was one of those places. Google wanted to build a data center there. That data center alone would have had the same electricity consumption as the city of Indianapolis. Okay, so that's pretty amazing in terms of sheer volume. So you may say to me, well, Titus, 176 terawatt hours per year. That's about 4% of the United States electricity consumption. What is the big deal here? Well, the big deal here is not just what's happening now, but also the growth rates over the next couple of years. So by 2028, just like 2 years from now, we are projecting that data centers for AI will consume between about 7 and 12% of US electricity. So that's a huge kind of it's like I'm thinking of the little Pac-Man game, the Pac-Man eats the little bombs, and it's just ever expanding. So that is a big concern for the country and also for the world. Speaking of the world, the UN University came out with a great report that I really recommend reading. It's not very long, but this is a very good assessment of the impact of AI on electricity, water, and land use. And you see some comparison numbers here. Electricity in about 6 years consumed by AI data centers is about the same as 650 million people. Does anybody know how many people live on this planet right now? Okay, 8 billion, 8.2 billion. So that's about 10% of the human population. That's kind of AI will consume the same electricity as this many people. Water, same consumption as the 1.3 billion people who live in sub-Saharan Africa. And they don't use as much water as we do here. So, that's 1/8, a little bit more than 1/8 of the world's population. In terms of land, 14,500 square kilometers might seem like an abstract figure, but the footprint of AI data centers, just from a land use perspective, is going to be about the size of the state of Connecticut. So if we took all data centers in the United States, put them in one place, Connecticut would cease to exist as a travel destination. Here's a quote from the report, and I'm not going to read it to you because I know that will make you fall asleep very quickly. But I wanted to highlight a few key phrases. The call here of these analyses is not to say, oh, okay, AI is bad, we need to go back to oil lanterns and stone tools. Okay, nobody's arguing that. But what this co-author of the UN report is arguing for is we need to pursue AI, but we need to do it in a way that kind of does not unduly damage our environment, that does not unduly disadvantage certain parts of humanity. As you know, climate change was not caused by the people in sub-Saharan Africa, in Asia. Climate change is mostly a product of industrialized nations, Europe, the United States. And so we created this huge inequity globally. And of course, we don't want to make that worse with AI. So certainly lots to think about in terms of the resource consumption of AI, and we'll get into some of the more details in a second. So I promised you a practical case study. I know there are a few people from health systems on this call. And so this is very practical and relevant. So the use case we're looking at is an LLM-powered tool, so a large language model-powered tool. And you know that this is one of the key methods in AI that drafts responses to patient portal messages. So many health systems actually are trying to get their patients onto health portals. How many people in the room have used their health portal with their doctor? Okay, good. Very relevant. Okay, so about 2/3. It's good, you know, you don't have to try to call the office of your doctor. You can send little emails about your test results and so on. So, you know, patient portals are really good, but it is another avenue for us to communicate with our healthcare professionals and vice versa. And that, of course, somebody needs to work on this. And clinicians are already complaining about overflowing inboxes. And so now you're saying, oh, we have this patient portal where patients can write to you. Aren't you excited? And they're like, no, I'm not excited. Okay. So what is the solution? With AI, you can draft responses to patient messages and overall make us more efficient, you know, reduce the time demand on clinicians, reduce burnout. Those are all good things. So what did the case study look at? And this is actually very representative of a large healthcare system. So I'll tell you a little bit about the baseline implementation. So a lightweight ChatGPT-based model categorizes incoming messages. So think about that part of the process as a gatekeeper. You know, is the message about a medication refill? Is it about an appointment? Or is it about a medical problem? And simply classifying the messages like that already helps you kind of respond to the message much more efficiently. Then for the messages that require a bigger response, the baseline scenario assumes that a larger ChatGPT model writes the draft. And that model has 1.6 trillion parameters, so 1.676 trillion tokens. Those are the words, punctuation that are in the model for it to make up the language that it's going to draft. So pretty Mercedes-like model. The input is, I think that's not on this slide. It's about 1,300 words. So the message from the patient is 1,300 words. It also takes in structured patient data and the last clinical note that was written about the patient, so to provide context. Further, we assume that the user base is 3,000 physicians. So I thought when I saw this number, okay, how does that compare to IU Health? Per the web, IU Health has 2,200 physicians. So very comparable to IU Health. And each one of those receives 50 messages a day. Well, that's probably a pretty average number. And then lastly, the electricity that powers all of this operation comes from a data center with a power usage effectiveness of 1.4. So let me explain what power usage effectiveness is. Basically, power usage effectiveness is a number that says how efficient is a data center in using the electricity that comes into it. So if PUE is 1, 100% of that electricity goes to the computing equipment, the storage equipment that actually makes the LLM work, the AI work, okay? But I don't know any data center that has a PUE of 1. So in this case, it's a PUE of 1.4. So you say, okay, slightly less efficient than the absolute total top line of efficiency. Where does that inefficiency come from? It comes from cooling, ancillary processes that the data center has to run all the equipment. And cooling is, as you now know, is a big factor. And this is where the water use comes in, because cooling data centers largely today happens with evaporative cooling, meaning that water gets fed into the system, it evaporates. When water evaporates, it cools down from the space where it evaporated from. And so that's why data centers typically use a lot of water. And at baseline, we produce 48,000 kilograms of CO2, which, as you see, is still a pretty small portion of the annual emissions of a health system. But think about it this way. This is just one AI application. So if you add 5 other ones like it, then you would already be at 1%. So it scales up pretty quickly. So in this table, I know it has a lot of numbers in it, and we'll just pick a few. So the base case that I just described is at the top. And so we're going to play through a couple of scenarios of how do we modify that base case? Like what are the other options? So your option A is not using just one clinical node as input, but 10. What do you think that difference, what's the difference between using one node and 10 nodes? You're responding to a patient and you want to tell them something useful. Why should 10 nodes be better than one node? Yes, more details. So you get more context about the patient from your 10 nodes. And of course, there are decreasing returns, probably the increment of useful detail from one node to 10 node is much bigger than going from 10 nodes to 100 nodes. But one could argue, okay, I'm going to use 10 nodes because I want to write good drafts for the physician to work with. Option B is a lean model, meaning we don't use the ChatGPT-4 model with the 1.676 trillion parameters. We use one that is about the 10th of that size, so that's 3.5. You can see that there's a vast difference between the yearly CO2 produced. So the lean model really makes a big difference even to the base case. Then we have the option of using a green data center. And you see, okay, and that's again with the more capable model that increases over the previous position, but it's still pretty reasonable. And then you combine a variety of these factors. The last model is 10 nodes, lean model, green data center, and that gets you the smallest carbon footprint, which is a fraction of the 48,000 kilograms of CO2 emitted by the base case. Okay, so does this mind game tell you what you should do? And the answer is, it doesn't give you like go with the last thing because that's the lowest emission approach. But it does give you some sense of where can you save CO2. So if you have access to a green data center or green power, you could consider that, and that definitely will take down your carbon footprint. The other big thing is model size, going down from 1.76 trillion parameters to something that's a lot smaller also helps you. By the way, one thing I learned about 2 weeks ago is AES Indiana, so our electricity company, has a program where you can tell them, I want only green power. And it costs a couple of dollars per month. It's called the AES Green Power Program. And the same day I heard about it from one of my colleagues on main campus, I'm like, I'm going to sign up for that because I can make AES only give me green power. Okay. So there's lots of things to research about that, but I was kind of floored that I had this option. And until Gabe Filippelli from Earth Sciences told me that, I actually did not know that I could just force my utility to give me green power at home. So I felt slightly better about myself that day. And there's still a little bit of an effect like that. But do I notice a difference? I haven't gotten my next electricity bill yet. So ask me again in 2 weeks. It's the same electricity. So, from that perspective, you don't notice any difference. But it comes from green sources. And of course, the question you could ask is, so Titus, what if everybody in Indiana signed up for green power at AES? They don't have the generating capacity. And that is correct. We don't have the solar panels and the windmills to generate power for all of Indiana. And so what they do is they buy green power certificates from other states. So you are actually guaranteed to get green power. It might not have been produced in Indiana, but it's still a good thing. So I'm hoping I convinced you, some of you at least, of the merits of this. So let's kind of zoom out a little bit and say, okay, Titus, this is all fine and good. We know when we talk through the patient message drafting use case, there were benefits of spending more resources and there were drawbacks of spending more resources. So what is a good analogy for how to think about that? And one of my co-authors on this presentation thought about making the analogy of antibiotic stewardship, okay? So we're going to talk through some of these points here. Why is antibiotic stewardship a good model for AI stewardship? So antibiotic stewardship already exists as a proven clinical culture. It's widely adopted through healthcare. And actually, Titus, full stop. What is antibiotic stewardship? I should probably have asked that question first. What is the big problems with antibiotics? And I give you a hint. The graphic on this slide tells you about a big problem with antibiotics. Yes, antimicrobial resistance. So if you look at this Petri dish, okay, and this, when I saw this today in Adobe stock, I'm like, oh my God, this looks like Fleming's dish with the mold and the bacteria, okay? Because what happened with Professor Fleming is he had mold contaminating his Petri dishes where he was trying to grow bacteria, and he observed the thing on the left, which is around the mold, and this is not mold in the middle there, this is actually the drug, but around the mold, the bacteria weren't growing, okay? And this is how penicillin was discovered. The mold produced penicillin, and by colonizing the Petri dish, Dr. Fleming, being an astute observer of natural phenomena, said, weird, why are there no bacteria in the vicinity of the mold? And that's when they started isolating penicillin from the mold. So whenever you take an antibiotic these days, a penicillin actually thanked the mold, because that is how we found this drug, okay? On the right-hand side, on the other hand, this drug, the bacteria are not influenced by it all. You can see they grow right up to the little carrier for the drug. So they are resistant to this drug and susceptible to the other drugs. So that is the key of antibiotic stewardship. How do we use antibiotics in ways that target the bacteria that are susceptible to it and really don't expose the antibiotic to bacteria that are either resistant or could become resistant, okay? Why does that matter? Why is that important? Why do we care? Because antibiotics are a very specific class of medications, and we don't make very many of those, okay? So whenever we make more and more bacteria, and it's only bacteria, resistant to antibiotics, the worse our position is to fight against antibiotic infections. And you've seen this already, I'm hoping not on yourself, but maybe heard about it in news reports. Patients who go to the hospital with an infection, they get an antibiotic, the infection is not influenced by the antibiotic at all because the bacteria are resistant, okay? So tuberculosis, for instance, is one of those bacteria that by repeated exposure to human-administered antibiotics has mutated to be resistant to quite a few of them, okay? And bacteria have a wonderful advantage for this. Why? Because there is so many of them and because they multiply so fast, okay? The life cycle of a bacterium is not like ours, measured in decades. It's measured in minutes, hours, days. So there's many, many tries bacterial population have to cope with an antibiotic. And so the more you expose bacterial populations to antibiotics that they are not likely susceptible to, that they can mutate to avoid, the more antibiotic-resistant infections you will create. So now that we got this definitional stuff out of the way, back to the antibiotic stewardship culture or antibiotic stewardship, which is basically how do we use antibiotics in ways that maximize the benefits and minimize the drawbacks. So as I said, it's an existing culture. It's also not about deprivation. It's about good professional judgment. It also considers antibiotics not as, oh, they're always good. Because if they were always good, we'd all be taking them all the time. We don't do that, okay? So think about the clinician who has to make a choice. Do I administer an antibiotic to this patient or not? That involves the consideration of trade-offs. Also, antibiotics stewardship scales from individual to system decisions. So you can really do this across the levels of decision-making capability in healthcare system. We can measure it. Hospitals measure antibiotic resistance within their patient population fairly routinely. And last, it aligns the economic argument with the environmental one. So the good news is that in terms of stewardship of AI, we actually have this antibiotic stewardship model that is already a part of healthcare. And so one thing that we need to do is make that analogy with clinicians, and hopefully we will make good choices at the individual, group, and system level. So I promised you a second case study. This is about AI for diabetic retinopathy screening exams. This is a simulation study. This did not happen in real life. They just calculated this and simulated this on paper. But I think it's pretty interesting in terms of what AI can do us that makes us more efficient. So the setting is that, or the question is whether autonomous AI can reduce the carbon footprint of diabetic retinopathy exams compared to the traditional process where we didn't use any AI. So the traditional process is patient goes to a primary care physician. Primary care physician says, oh, you have diabetes. We will send you to the ophthalmologist to get your screening exam done. Very relevant for the patient. I don't know how many of you know somebody with diabetes, but one of the consequences of late-stage diabetes is blindness. So you want to catch this early. So the patient goes to the PCP, makes a separate appointment, goes to the ophthalmologist, gets the exam done, and that's the end of the case study. So with AI, we eliminate the visit to the ophthalmologist. AI in the primary care physician's office takes the photograph of the patient's retina, analyzes it, screens it for retinopathy. If it screens positive, the patient still has to go to an ophthalmologist. That's about, I think, 20% of the cases, if I remember correctly. But in 80% of those visits, you will just have one patient visit. And so the data, when we compare the two things, is for the traditional method, we generate 17.6 pounds of greenhouse gases. With the AI exam, instead, we generate 1,600 or 3.6 pounds. So we reduce greenhouse gas emissions by about 80%. So think about this for a moment, okay? AI probably has some incremental carbon footprint over what the ophthalmologist does, at least on a computational space. But by avoiding the patient driving to a separate visit, it actually has a much larger beneficial effect. And so it's a good example of where AI can make us more efficient. And so that's where AI can save us. You know, that's where that part of the title comes from. I want to zoom up a little bit and talk about some other possibilities. And I'm going to frame them in a 3-category framework that was published by Jody Sherman and her colleagues in the paper Net Zero Healthcare, the Clinician's Role. So when we think about healthcare at large, and as you probably know, healthcare is a carbon-intensive industry. It puts out 8.5% of the US greenhouse gas emissions. And think about energy, that's about 25 to 30%, and transportation, 25%. So healthcare is not small. And so I think it's definitely fitting for us to think about how can we reduce healthcare's carbon footprint. And Jody proposed a 3-level way of looking at this. So the first one is reducing supply side emissions. And that's basically saying if healthcare has to happen, let's make sure we do it as efficiently as possible. And there's lots of ways we can think about that, and we'll dig into the details a little bit. Second, we should also match supply with demand. So we should not administer more healthcare systems, healthcare services than our totality of patient needs. So let's not over-medicate, over-treat, over-diagnose patients. Big discussion. And lastly, we should think about how do we reduce the demand for healthcare, okay? I'm 62. And so mentally, I sometimes compare myself to my dad, okay, who lived to be 71 and then died of a massive heart attack. At my age now, my dad was basically sedentary. Okay, so he was, of course, a German, just like me, but he was the more typical Bavarian-looking German. You know, big beer belly, fairly intense alcohol consumptions, not a lot of exercise, poor diet, Schweinshaxe, you know, a lot of pork, dumplings, you know, I love it, but not every day. And so I'm like thinking, okay, you know, I don't know how far I'm going to make it. You know, I might die tomorrow in a bicycle accident. But from a health behavior perspective, I've arranged my cards much better. I rode my bicycle in this morning. You know, I try to stay active. We try to eat vegetables from our backyard. Fairly little meat. And if we eat meat, it's usually not beef. So we reduce demand for healthcare. You know, I am unlikely to have severe heart disease, although you never know. So everyone, you know, and we as a society, we can do things that help us reduce the demand for healthcare services. If you think of Europe, you know, picture Amsterdam with its bicycles and lots of bikeways. When my wife and I were in the Netherlands, we bicycled from one city to the next on bike paths, okay? Wonderful experience. Not really possible here. You know, have you ever tried to bike from Philadelphia to New York? I haven't, you know, because I know it's not a pleasant bike ride. So the way we arrange our cells, the way we arrange our built environment has a lot to do with how healthy we are. And I think many countries in Europe, and actually all countries elsewhere, actually show us some good examples for that. So 3-layer paradigm here. If you have to provide healthcare, do it as efficiently as possible. Don't overdo healthcare. And lastly, help your population be healthy in the first place so they don't need as much healthcare. So the examples here, we're not going to go through them in detail, but here are things, the first 5 points here that we can do in healthcare to reduce our carbon footprint. It ranges from how we manage energy. Energy in hospitals is a big thing. Hospitals are 2.5 to 3 times more energy hungry than your average office building. But if you put AI into your heating, cooling, and AC system, you can already save 20 to 30% of that energy off the bat. So it's one of those, whoa, why don't we have AI powering the HVAC systems in our building or controlling them? Similarly, inventory and operating room management, supply chain, telehealth. If you avoid patient and provider travel, big reduction, relatively speaking, in your carbon footprint. Matching supply with demand. The sad fact is that 25% of all healthcare globally is not helpful. Okay. Tom Imperiale here is one of my favorites on the subject. Of course, gastroenterologist, and he talks a lot about, is it useful to have routine colonoscopies to screen for dysplasia or cancer? And the answer is we are over-screening people for colon disease. And it's an involved procedure. It's expensive. It has a big carbon footprint. We also want to reduce technology creep. Whenever something new gets invented in healthcare, and that's also true for AI, we got to think about, okay, do we really need to use that new technology for a particular purpose? And lastly, we talked about this already, promoting healthy behaviors, emphasizing prevention will shrink the required services in healthcare. And I think we have lots of potential ways to do that. So with that, let me close, and hopefully you kind of got a view of the bad parts of AI and the good parts of AI. I'm sure somebody's going to ask me, so Titus, what is your answer? Will AI kill us or save us? I cannot tell you that, okay? The answer is probably going to be in the middle. But I think we as a community, we as a research community, as a practitioner community, as a healthcare community, we can definitely think much more smartly than we are doing right now about how we use AI in healthcare or even research, okay? You may have realized, or you may have noticed, I didn't use a single AI picture in my talk. A lot of my colleagues do, okay? But the question is, do I need it, okay? I had this nice photo from Rocky Mountain National Park. It said something that I wanted to say. Plus, it was the only opportunity to get you to look at my vacation photo. So double benefit, okay? The other stuff I got off Adobe stock. Those pictures are already made. And I always click the button, don't give me AI-generated content in Adobe stock because it's annoying. We're still at a level where I think a lot of us can tell AI-generated pictures and videos. A capability that my wife has lost. She routinely shows me pictures with babies and cute puppies milling all over the baby. And I'm like, honey, it's AI. And she's like, you're destroying my emotional connection to this video. But the question is, do we need to use it? And I even asked that question for my presentation here. So I'm hoping I got you to think about this, which is really the only objective I had for today. If you're interested in more, join us in the EMEA Climate, Health, and Informatics Working Group. So I founded that group 4 years ago. I'm the chair emeritus. And a lot of the authors and contributors to this talk and many other topics are actually coming from that working group. So it is the funnest group to be with because these people are really motivated. They work really hard, and I don't pay them. So it's a wonderful setup. Number two, we are working on a big migration with the American Medical Informatics Association, where AI here, as you saw it, will be a 2.5 to 3 hour module. And the same people who were listed on the title slide are actually helping make that module. There's 10 other modules about sustainability in healthcare. So if you're interested in learning more about this, tell me. It's kind of the pre-sale phase. I don't have it yet, but I'm certainly happy to take your phone number and your email address if you are interested in this. The first 6 or so modules will come out at the EMEA Fall Symposium. So that is the hard, no miss, Titus gets his head cut off deadline if for the first deliverables of this micro certification. And it's really good content. We probably have about 60 people working on this. It's actually worse than writing a book, which I have done, and then said to myself, I'll never do that again. Well, here I am making this micro certification. In total, it'll be 25 instructional hours, and it'll be for informaticians and non-informaticians. So there will be an informatics spin on it, as we had today. But I'm hoping, even if you're not an informatician, you actually understood a few things from my talk today. And last, there's a video series which I made with one of my students in the fall, which is basically a 44-minute tour of sustainability in healthcare in 6 videos. And so AI is actually one of those topics there. So with that, let me close, and then we can answer some questions, either from online or from you guys. So thank you very much. Questions, comments?
So I appreciate the actual data regarding things like the oil industry or electricity or water. But I think when I'm thinking about something like AI, I care about the context in the numbers. So how is AI operating compared to other fields? And then how did it operate in comparison to like the internet boom when all those data centers came out, the industrial revolution, like some of those time points to see, is AI substantially using more energy, or are we actually more efficient? Because there's been, different opinions on the water compared to other industries or less or not. And I'm curious, is there any like studies that we know that have compared between those different parts? And
yeah, so I'm glad you're asking this question. It's a very reasonable question, and I try to pepper my talk with a little bit of that. So one graph I didn't put on a slide was electricity expenditures on data centers divided by, is it for AI or not? Okay. At the moment, data centers electricity requirements are about half and half. So half is for AI and half is for other things, like the internet, Google, okay, Facebook, social media, whatever. Unfortunately, that ratio will shift substantially in favor of AI. So AI will eat up in increasing proportion of the energy that we use for data centers, okay? Computing worldwide is about, I think right now, don't nail me if it's a little bit off, in the 5 to 6% range, okay? Let me give you some comparison figures. Airline travel, 4%. Energy generation, 25 to 30% in the United States. Transportation, 25%. Land use and agriculture, 25%. So if you think about these big sectors, AI is still small, okay? And I don't want to be the guy, I don't want you guys to walk away from here going like, oh my God, the world is on fire because of AI. No, it is not on fire because of AI, but the growth rates, as you saw in my third and fourth slides, they are a little bit worrisome, okay? Then, of course, there will be people, and I think Sean would say this if he were here. He would say, well, Titus, what about AI data centers in space? Okay, so Elon Musk's company, SpaceX, okay, one of their future products is supposed to be data centers in space, okay? What's good about that? Space is cool. You do not want to go there without good clothing, okay? Then you have sunlight directly getting onto your solar panels. So you get 100% of the sunlight. You know, there's nothing to stop the sunlight from reaching the panels. So I think probably from an energy generation perspective, space is a good place to be when you're a data center, okay? So cooling and energy. I'm not quite sure about the bandwidth of the data link between the data center and us. You know, you got to get the data from here to there and back. But it's an option. Another thing is leaner models, okay? Anybody remember DeepSeek? Okay, so DeepSeek, big sensation, a Chinese model that actually was a lot leaner than other bigger models that performed just as well on some benchmarks as some of the market-leading models. Why did this happen in China? Because the Chinese didn't have access to all the expensive NVIDIA chips, so they needed to invent ways to do the same performance, to get to the same performance using cheaper methods. And so they have smaller models, they have smaller chips. And then last, cooling systems. You know, I mentioned evaporative cooling, where you basically pipe water in, and most of that water is evaporated into the air, okay? There are also immersion cooling systems, meaning your computing equipment is in a liquid. They tend to be more expensive, okay? Or relocate your AI data center to Alaska, okay? Just leave the door open. And that, you know, makes a pretty good air-cooled system. So I don't want to make it sound like, you know, AI is this big thing that is killing us right now, but we definitely need to think about how do we power and cool this stuff. Does that answer your question? Excellent. Other questions? Yeah, we'll take one from online.
Just asking if there's any concern for pollution regarding data centers. I've learned that the data centers have backup generators that are powered by diesel, and they need to test them frequently.
Excellent question. One of my students, Laura, who's in the videos with me, she's really passionate about health equity and environmental equity. She cites this case of a data center in Memphis that happens to be powered by diesel generators. And not just one, it's like a whole battery of diesel generators. It's an Elon Musk data center. It's built in a poor neighborhood, predictably, which is now suffering from a lot more respiratory disease because the diesel generators put out more particulate matter, and there's other factors which make the air worse in the context of climate change. So yes, that definitely is a concern. As far as I remember from the article that I read about this, these diesel generators were actually not permitted, meaning they didn't go through the requisite regulatory approvals. So it's your typical kind of like, put it in the poor neighborhood. You don't have to worry about a lot of resistance, but there is resistance against that, but it is definitely a concern. Good question. Other questions? We have maybe 2 more minutes, 3 more minutes. Yes.
That question was actually part of my question, but I'm curious about the noise pollution aspect that gets a lot of press and what you also think about the Indianapolis City Council planning to vote on a moratorium.
Okay, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty locally. So good questions. Yes, there is noise pollution. A lot of data centers get built in greenfield sites, like out in the country where they're a little bit away from people. So I think that is done for a number of reasons, you know, which we could enumerate. So that's one thing. The City Council, you can see how they are struggling with this. I read Andre Carson's stance on data centers yesterday. I think he sent out that with a newsletter. And, what he's arguing for is disclosure, transparency, community input, which is, I think, all things that we should do, But, for the foreseeable future, certain localities will say, oh, data center, great, build it here, because there's the economic argument of, okay, there's going to be jobs during construction, which is the like, oh yeah, okay, and then tell me what happens 2 years later when those jobs are gone. It's not a real economic engine for a largely agricultural county. So I think you're asking the right questions. Again, should we say no, absolutely, to any data center whatsoever? No. We do need AI. We should take advantage of the good parts of it, but should we be conscientious about where we build them, how we power them, what aquifers they suck the water out of? Absolutely. Nicole, I think you had a question.
I actually didn't raise my hand, but I do have a question because the last slide before this one, you showed some topics that could AI would assist, but that could assist with AI. And I thought that your use of prevention in AI was really. But what is your comment about when we're talking about behavioral health and just health behaviors in AI?
Very good question. So I'm actually happy that you're asking this question because it reminds me of one point that I wanted to make in this talk, which I did not. So AI can actually be a health promoting thing, okay? Maybe we'll stay away from mental health for a moment because you and I and many others here in this room, we kind of know some bad things that happened on the mental health side in AI. Teenagers who committed suicide after bonding too much with some AI agent. But, AI can be like a coach, for lifestyle things. And so I think there is a role for that. I want to leave you with this one last point, which I actually managed to put into a paper that we just wrote a couple of months ago, which is the following. My hypothesis is that humans are more and more willing to let technology dictate their behavior. Okay, that might sound a little bit controversial, but think about your life. How many times have you taken advice from an AI agent and actually done it? I mean, I know people who've planned whole vacations using AI, okay? I mean, I use AI a lot for home renovation. It helped me understand my new basement floor coating options and so on. So I think there is an increasing propensity to let technology into our lives and help us make decisions or even direct our lives, which means that we could also, if we do it smartly, help us become more sustainable, okay? And if that happens with AI, I think overall the benefit could actually be substantial. So on that really, really positive note, thank you very much. Thanks for your attention and your engagement.